Imagine the year is 1914. The Great War, the war to end all wars, has been raging for 5 brutal months. Millions of young men, once filled with patriotic fervor, now find themselves mired in a hellish landscape of mud, barbed wire, and death. This is the Western Front, a network of trenches stretching for hundreds of miles. Across Belgium and France, life here is a grim cycle of terror and boredom. The constant shelling, the sniper's bullet, the ever-present stench of decay, and the gnawing cold have stripped away much of what it means to be human. Hope is a scarce commodity, buried deep beneath layers of mud and despair. On one side you have the British and French soldiers, huddled in their waterlogged trenches. On the other, separated by a desolate stretch of ground known as no man's land, are the German soldiers. They are enemies, trained to kill one another without hesitation. They speak different languages, fight for different flags, and have been told that the men on the other side are monsters, barbarians deserving of nothing but destruction. Yet, as Christmas approached, something extraordinary began to stir in the frozen mud of the trenches. The first signs were small, almost imperceptible. Letters home from soldiers on both sides spoke of a strange lull in the fighting. A curious lack of aggression seemed to settle over certain sectors of the front. The generals and high command, far from the front lines, issued strict orders against any form of fraternization with the enemy. Christmas, they declared, would be no different. The war must go on. But for the men in the trenches, the men who lived and died within earshot of their supposed enemies, the coming of Christmas felt different. They were exhausted, homesick, and disillusioned. They weren't fighting against abstract ideas of imperialism or nationalism. They were fighting against other young men just like them who were cold, scared, and just wanted to go home. Then came Christmas Eve as a bitter cold descended upon the battlefield. A strange and beautiful sound drifted from the German trenches. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in this desolate landscape for months. It was singing. German soldiers began to sing carols, familiar tunes like Still Nacht or Silent Night as we know it. The melody, pure and haunting, floated across the shell-pocked expanse of no man's land. At first, the British soldiers were suspicious. Was it a trick? A ruse to lure them out into the open? They remained tense, fingers on their triggers, but the singing continued, not with aggression, but with a profound and aching beauty. Then a brave British soldier started to sing back, a rendition of the first Noel. Soon others joined in, their voices rising to meet the Germans in the cold night air. For a few magical moments, the battlefield was transformed into a bizarre, impromptu concert hall. The weapons fell silent, replaced by a chorus of shared humanity. As the carols echoed back and forth, another incredible sight appeared. Small lights began to flicker along the German parapets. They were Christmas trees, lit with candles, placed bravely in view of the enemy. It was an astonishing gesture of peace, a defiant act of beauty in a world defined by ugliness. From the British trenches, soldiers shouted Christmas greetings across no man's land. Merry Christmas, Tommy. A German voice might call out, Merry Christmas, Fritz. An English voice would reply. The fear and suspicion that had defined their existence began to melt away, replaced by a powerful and overwhelming sense of shared experience. These weren't monsters. They were men, men who missed their families, who loved Christmas, and who were tired of the killing. The real miracle happened on Christmas morning. Cautiously, a few German soldiers emerged from their trenches, unarmed, holding their hands up to show they meant no harm. They walked slowly into the middle of no man's land. After a tense moment, British soldiers did the same. They met in the middle, in that deadly space that had claimed so many lives. They shook hands. They looked into each other's eyes and saw not an enemy, but a fellow human being. This was not an isolated incident. All along the Western Front, similar spontaneous truces broke out. Soldiers who had been trying to kill each other just hours before were now sharing what little they had. Germans offered cigars and schnapps. The British offered plum pudding, cigarettes, and tins of beef. They showed each other pictures of their families, wives, and children back home. They discovered they had more in common than they ever imagined. Many were of a similar age, from similar working class backgrounds, swept up in a conflict they barely understood. They helped each other bury their dead, who had lain for weeks in no man's land. Together they performed joint burial services, reciting the 23rd Psalm in both English and German. It was a moment of profound respect and shared grief, a recognition that loss was the same, no matter which uniform the fallen soldier wore. And then, famously, there was the football. In several sectors, the truce evolved into something truly unbelievable. A game of football, using tin cans or bundled rags as a ball. These sworn enemies engaged in a friendly kickabout. For a few hours, the grim reality of war was forgotten. The churned-up mud of no man's land became a football pitch. The sounds of rifles and artillery were replaced by shouts and laughter. Reports from soldiers describe these matches with a sense of wonder. This truce was a grassroots movement, born from the soldiers themselves. It was a direct defiance of their orders and a powerful statement about the nature of war and humanity. The men on the ground, the ones doing the fighting and dying, realized that their common humanity was stronger than the nationalistic hatred they were being fed. They chose peace, even if only for a day. Of course, it couldn't last. The high command on both sides was furious. They saw the truce as a dangerous breakdown of military discipline. Orders were reissued, threatening severe punishment for any further fraternization. Generals were terrified that if soldiers realized they had no reason to hate each other, the war effort would collapse by the day after Christmas, and in some places a few days later, the pressure from above forced the men back into their trenches. A reluctant shot would be fired, a shell would land, and slowly the machinery of war ground back into motion. One soldier wrote poignantly in his diary, "We are enemies again today." The brief, beautiful peace was over. The war would drag on for 4 more horrifying years, claiming millions more lives. The Christmas Truce of 1914 was never repeated on such a scale. The bitterness and the sheer scale of death in the years that followed made such an event almost unthinkable. The war became more industrialized, more dehumanizing. So why do we remember this story? Why does the Christmas Truce continue to capture our imagination over a century later? Because it serves as a powerful reminder. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, in the most brutal of circumstances, our shared humanity can shine through. It shows us that the lines drawn on maps and the uniforms we wear are artificial constructs. Underneath it all, we are all just people. The soldiers of 1914 weren't politicians or generals. They were ordinary men placed in an extraordinary situation, and in that moment they made a choice. They chose connection over conflict. They chose carols over cannon fire. They chose a game of football over a fight to the death. The story of the Christmas Truce is not just a quaint historical anecdote. It's a lesson. It's a beacon of hope that proves that peace is not a passive state, but an active choice. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find light in the deepest darkness. It asks us a fundamental question: if enemies in the heat of battle can find a way to lay down their arms and see the humanity in each other, what is stopping us from doing the same in our own lives, in our own time? The world they returned to fighting in was not the world they wanted, but for one brief, shining moment, they created the world as it could be, and that is a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth striving for. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of our shared history.